There's a million different ways to prepare salmon, smoked salmon, and there's a million different ways to consume the amazing fish that we get to catch out of the river systems. And I wanted to talk about how we're going to take this big bag of sockeye right here that me and my buddy just got done catching at Brewster Pool on the Columbia River, and we're going to turn that into sockeye candy. But how we're going to do that is a little unconventional for how other people do it. So we're actually going to dry brine this first. We're going to let that dry brine overnight. We're going to wake up early in the morning, and we are going to pull it out of the dry brine. We're going to let it sit out for about 30 minutes after we pat it dry, and then we are going to wet brine it with a Hawaiian style teriyaki, and we are going to put that on the smoker after it sits in that brine for about 6 hours. And then we are going to create teriyaki sockeye candy. So welcome back to another walking on water tutorial, of course. The first thing that we're going to do here, we're going to get the sockeye out of the bag. We're going to put it on the tray, pat it dry just a little bit, cut it into some strips. All right, guys, so here's one of the fillets. Perfect size, perfect thickness to make a perfect sockeye candy. As you can tell, there's a little trimming that needs to be done. You want to rub your finger over these bones here, and you do kind of want to pull out with tweezers or needle nose. You can pull out all these bones along the fish right here so you don't end up getting them into your actual smoked salmon themselves. So we're going to take about 4 or 5 of these, and we're going to trim them down to size after we pat them dry. Let's get right into it. All right, so we have our piece of fish laying on our makeshift cutting board because we do not have one. But we're just gonna cut it into nice small strips. I always like to leave the skin on my fish. Once you smoke it, it's gonna help that fish actually adhere to that skin a lot more. Because salmon, if you know, if you've ever let it sit out for any length of time, you do know that it gets extremely fragile and it does like to fall apart. So we're just cutting it nicely, nice little strips. I like to go about 1 inch, a little over, that's fine too. Want to make sure that you try to stay somewhat symmetrical all the way down so you get a nice even smoke throughout the whole entire fillet. Super simple, super easy dry brine. Everybody uses this. Is just simply brown sugar and kosher salt. We're just gonna add a little bit of brown sugar to the bottom here, and we're gonna pat it down and rub it around over the bottom of our tray here. Okay, we're gonna get a little bit more in there. I just wanna cover up the whole entire bottom of the fish so the fish is not sitting on nothing, okay? That is step number 1, okay? Now we're gonna mix up our actual dry brine. We're gonna grab a bowl. Okay, we're just gonna grab a tub like this, just like so. And we're gonna fill it 3/4 of the way full of brown sugar. Kind of break it up a little bit. Get it nice and kind of broken up in there with your hand, no big deal, just like that. Then we are going to grab some kosher salt, this Morton's kosher, and then I'm gonna do 1/3 cup of salt, because if you add a ton of salt into your dry brine, it's going to make your smoke just absolutely way too salty. Your fish is going to get way too salty from the actual salt itself, obviously, but 1/3 cup, from my experience, is absolutely freaking perfect, and it does the job just right. Just massage the salt into the brown sugar like so. Then we're going to take our pieces of fish and we're gonna start laying them into the tray. So right on the brown sugar like so, nice and butted up against each other, pushing them nice and tight. And we're gonna lay all these out. All right, now that we have all of our sockeye laid down in the bottom of the tray like so, now we're gonna take our dry brine and we are gonna sprinkle it right over the top of this fish. And what this is gonna do, it's gonna pull all the moisture out of the fish with that brown sugar and salt. And tomorrow we're gonna be left with a nice gel along the bottom, and we're gonna pull out the fish and we're gonna pat it all dry. I know this is a multi-step process, but this is going to produce some absolutely amazing sockeye candy. So we will see you guys first thing in the morning. It is the next day and we've pulled our sockeye salmon out of the refrigerator after brining it all night in our dry brine. When the brown sugar and salt has done its job, you'll notice that you have a thick kind of slime in the bottom of your brine tray. And that's pulling all that moisture out of that fish. So our goal here is to get this washed off with cold water. We're gonna let it sit for about 30 minutes. We're gonna make up our wet brine. After it's nice and dry, we're gonna drop it down into the wet brine, and then we're gonna let that brine for another 4 hours. Then we're putting it on the smoker. Let's get this stuff rinsed. Let's get it into our pan, and let's let it start drying out just a little bit. As you can also see, this salmon is already firmed up a ton. I mean, just from sitting in the dry brine overnight, it's a completely different fish. Where before, it was falling apart because it gets a little bit warm and it starts getting mushy. This has already formed a nice, tacky, thick, binding layer on the salmon itself. And so once we wash this off and let it dry out just a little bit, it might soften back up a tiny bit, but we kind of want it to be dry. We kind of want it to be nice and tacky because we're still gonna put it into the wet brine. Now, you could take this fish right now and go put it on the smoker and have amazing, very natural smoked salmon. You know what I mean? Bare minimum, brown sugar and salt makes an amazing smoked salmon. But we're going for a beautiful little teriyaki style. So that's what we're gonna do here. We got all of our salmon pieces into our tray. Now, all we're gonna do is just lightly rinse these with cold water, just so we can get some of this brown sugar and slime off. Then we're gonna place them onto a wire rack and let them dry just for a little bit so we can make our wet brine. And now we're gonna get into making our wet brine. So I have 3 cups of water that's gonna go into our wet brine first. Then we are gonna hit it with 1/3 cup soy sauce. Pour that bad boy in there. Okay, 1/3 cup soy sauce, 2/3 cup of the teriyaki sauce. Then we're gonna go 1/3 cup of honey. Doesn't matter what kind of honey you want to use. Any kind of honey, local honey, processed honey, just honey. This is 100% real honey from Walmart, so that's what we're using here today. And we're going to give it a nice mix. Then we're going to take our sugar, just regular sugar, don't need to use brown sugar. We're going to use 1, 2, and 3. 3 1/3 cups, aka 1 cup. And we're gonna give it a nice mix. Now that our wet brine's done, we're gonna set it off to the side. We have our dry brined sockeye right in front of us, and we're gonna let this dry for about 30 minutes out in the open air. Then we are going to place it into our wet brine. We're gonna cover the wet brine, re-put it in the refrigerator. We're gonna wait 4 hours. At the 4-hour mark, this will come out of the wet brine and go directly into the Traeger at 160 to 180 degrees to smoke for the remainder of its life until it becomes teriyaki smoked salmon. We have our salmon on the Traeger, and we are going to let this sit for about 3 to 4 hours. We're gonna be checking it every hour just to see if those smaller pieces are getting done a little bit faster. We're going for a pretty good smoke on these. We want it to be fairly firm. I like a jerky-esque type smoked salmon, and that's what we're gonna do. We don't want it mushy, we don't want it wet on the inside. Now, some of the thicker pieces we might leave with a little bit of that moist center. Other than that, we're going for a pretty strict, long smoke so we can get the best consistency for this teriyaki sockeye candy. Stay with us, we're almost ready for the tasting. The sockeye salmon has been on the Traeger smoking for the last 2.5 hours, and the pieces were cut small enough to where it's looking like it's getting perfect candy style smoked salmon. But we are going to do one more thing that's gonna change and elevate this salmon to another level. We're gonna make a little bit of a rub, a baste if you will, what we're gonna do, we're gonna take some honey, we're gonna take some teriyaki sauce and a tiny little bit of garlic, and we are gonna reduce it down into a nice thick sauce, and we're gonna go paint it over our smoked salmon. But we're not just gonna paint it on there and leave the smoke running. We're gonna turn the heat up just a little bit so it caramelizes that honey, teriyaki, and garlic to the exterior of our smoked salmon itself. So we're gonna use our honey that we used earlier. Put a nice little dollop of honey into your pot, just like so. We're gonna take our teriyaki, put the remainder of our teriyaki in there, just like so. And then we're gonna take just a dash of garlic salt. This is not garlic powder, it's garlic salt, so you do not want to go too heavy on this. Just like that. Then we're gonna take it, we're gonna put it on the stove. Then we're just gonna take our brush and we're gonna lightly coat each piece of fish with the reduction that we just made in the kitchen. So as you can see, these front dark candy red ones already have the sauce on them, and the back ones do not yet. And we're gonna start saucing the back ones. Get each one coated up nicely. Then what we're going to do, we're just gonna turn the heat up just so that sauce can adhere to the fish, and then we're gonna pull it off and we're gonna give it a taste test. The cook is finally done. It took about 3 hours and 45 minutes to get the whole entire cook process done and over with, but in my opinion, they look absolutely amazing. The little rub, the wet rub we did, absorbed into the meat pretty well. It's a nice tacky finish on the exterior of this salmon, and it looks absolutely amazing. It's actually super hot still right now, but the inside should be absolutely perfect as that skin rips right off the back of that. That is absolutely freaking delicious. This is teriyaki smoked salmon, and we use sockeye salmon to do it. It took us from last night until mid-afternoon today, so roughly about an 18-hour process. We put it in the dry brine, then we woke up, we dried it off, we put it in the wet brine, and this came out absolutely amazing. Just look at that, guys. Nice, dark, tacky, teriyaki smoked salmon. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this episode of Walking on Water. My first run at a video for smoked salmon, and I have to say that this recipe absolutely outdid itself. If you guys are looking for a new smoked salmon recipe and you want to try one, this is the one for you. I'll catch you in the next one.